All right, guys, I think we're live here on YouTube. We are up and going on Instagram as well. Good morning. It's Friday, April 29th. We're heading into sampler weekend. Fantastic weekend for us all. I'm Joe Hanisco. I'll be your host today for the Fitness Athlete Friday podcast on PT on Ice Daily Show. We'll be chatting today about the difference or maybe the conversation between overtraining and under recovery. I'm not quite so sure that there's a perfect answer to which one is actually occurring at any given time, but I'm going to kind of flip the switch a little bit today and talk about maybe how we need to be looking more at the recovery standpoint than the overtraining standpoint, at least from our day-to-day athletes who are dealing with signs of overtraining or under recovery. So we'll get into that, into the nitty gritty. Before we dive into that, a couple of fitness athlete courses coming up. We have our Essentials live course. Essentials online course coming up in June. Our other online course, which is the Advanced Concept course, is coming in August. So those are our two next online courses if you're looking to get in on either of those. And then in terms of live courses specifically for fitness athlete, we have one coming up here at the end of May over in South Carolina. And then we have a few coming up through June and July. I think we have one over in Maryland in early June. July is actually coming to Michigan with my hometown of Grand Rapids. So if you're looking to get into any of our fitness athlete courses, take a look online, ptnice.com, and you'll find those courses that you can sign up, and we'd be happy to have you there. So all right, so let's dive into it. What is the difference, or is there a difference between someone who is overtraining or under recovering? This really just came about in my mind in the last couple of weeks as I've been having. I think I had two or three athletes where I've had this conversation with. These two or three athletes that I have in mind are all recreational CrossFit athletes across the spectrum, from just the 4 day a weeker looking to improve fitness and health, and a couple of these athletes are still novice but higher level novice CrossFit athletes competing in quarterfinal levels and things like that, and looking to get into individual competition. So all these athletes were training somewhere between 4 to 6 days a week, and they're coming to see me for varying issues. I would not consider any of them to be actual injuries, but maybe some overuse things, aches and pains, multiple areas. So the conversation of overtraining came up, and actually two of these specifically brought it up in my attention. They were like, "Hey, do you feel like I'm overtraining?" So that kind of opened up the can of worms in this conversation where uh, when we think about overtraining, there's a few things that come to mind in terms of symptoms or behaviors that we hear. And obviously the first one being just pain and injuries that seem to be out of the norm and kind of uncontrolled. I mean, it might be one thing one day, another thing the next day, or one nagging injury or pain area that keeps coming back. So these are definitely common signs of overtraining. But as well, we start to dive into things like lack of performance, which one of these athletes was talking about how they felt like, they were expecting to see improvement in performance and specific weight gains and some of their weightlifting, but yet they were seeing declines or at least struggles to hit certain percentages that they thought might not be so challenging for them with all the training that they're putting in. So drops in performance can be a sign of overtraining. Lack of motivation, like losing interest in getting into the gym. All these things can occur outside of just pain. And those are signs of overtraining. If we read about overtraining, that's what we talk about there. So I think what we failed to recognize sometimes with these sort of our day-to-day athletes is that it's not just the stress and strain of fitness, though, that can lead to the overall stress and physical stress on the body. That's what I started talking about with these athletes, is that, unlike professional athletes where all they have to do is wake up, eat, train, sleep, recover, repeat, most of us are dealing with external stresses and factors that could be limiting our progress and or just compiling our overall stress levels of our physical and mental state on our bodies. And these are things like work, and if your parents, taking care of children, the schedules of running children around, maybe you have a new dog in your life, like whatever that might be, those external factors absolutely start to weigh in on us. So we can't just look at our training schedule in a bubble, because honestly, if you look at these athletes of training 4 to 6 days a week or 4 to 6 sessions a week, that sort of fits right into the wheelhouse of what we want for a lot of our CrossFit athletes, particularly in meeting appropriate stimulus with at least 3 to 4 days a week, but not maxing out hitting 6 and 7 days a week all the time. So from a pure training volume standpoint, this is where I started to flip the switch and say, realistically, I don't know that you're overtraining. You might be training at 75% of your overall capacity of what you physically are capable of doing, but are you recovering at greater than 75% of what you're capable of doing? if your training volume and your overall stress volumes are pushing you to 75, 80% of your stress tolerance, but yet you're recovering at 50% consistently or less, then we're going to run into some issues. And these might be the issues that we're talking about right now today. So overtraining is absolutely a possibility. They're not saying that's not a real thing. This is where I want to flip the script on us and let's talk about recovery and what we could do to maintain those training levels rather than think that we just have to constantly reduce our training levels if we're considering an overtraining effect. So we talked about then with these athletes, I got in conversation and we looked at different aspects of their program, their sleep, their diet. These are the three things that really I tend to really hit home on with my clients and my athletes. Of if we're going to talk about improving their ability to recover and tolerate their training volume, let's look at these three factors. So with programming first, that's a simple one that outside of just the volume and the days a week of training, like what are they doing within those training sessions? Like having a conversation with them, or are they neglecting something? Are they missing out on some accessory work that might be helping with some of their tendon pain and their aches and joint issues? Are they lacking time to invest in mobility? Are they overtraining one aspect? Are they trying to work on building up a one rep max squat, so their squat cycle has been recently increased and now they're squatting 3 and 4 days a week versus normally tolerating only 1 day a week of specific squat training? So we got to look at, are they missing anything or are they overtraining anything outside of just the total volume there? And then having conversations about manipulating that, because a lot of times if we can just adjust their training, not necessarily back them down completely, but just adjust their training within each little variable there, we might see improvements of their recovery just because they're starting to tolerate what they're asking themselves to do a little bit better. So we got to start with programming. If it's a programming issue, if it's a training issue, and we don't know what they're doing, then we're missing a boat for sure. Sleep after that has to be the next most a crucial factor that we're diving into. I think, there's a Tim Walker, the Matthew D. Walker actually is the name of referencing here. He wrote a book called Why Sleep Matters, and one of the quotes from his book was that if sleep could be put into a pill format, it's the most underutilized drug that we have available to us. Like sleep is absolutely crucial and essential to recovering from not just fitness, but just recovering from life. So I opened up the door and had a conversation about sleep with these athletes, and something that we definitely need to be comfortable doing, talking to all of our clients and our patients, but especially our athletes, about sleep. And normally the way that I do that is I ask them on a 0 to 10 scale, if 10 out of 10 was the best sleep you could possibly imagine right now, where do you put yourself? And they give themselves a number in that scale. And a lot of times people are not willing to put themselves at a 10, and maybe realistically they know they're not at a 10. So that number falls somewhere between a 4 and a 7 or something. And then wherever that number is, though, my next follow-up question is that if you're at a 5 now or a 6 now, and your goal is to push towards that 8, 9, and 10 range, what's getting you there? Is it a lack of consistency, a lack of quality? Is it that you're having a hard time staying asleep when you are asleep? I start to give them some of my knowledge of what we could be talking about and let them sort of pave the path of which direction we're going. But sleep has to be brought up in this conversation because that's our opportunity for our bodies to actually make meaningful changes in tissue recovery and even neurologic and central nervous system recovery as well. So we covered some of their programming aspects and talked about, was there certain factors that we need to address? We absolutely brought up sleep and talked about where they feel they stand today, right now, and how can we get them to a place that might improve their overall recovery by improving their sleep quality and or quantity. We know we need more sleep, but we got to have it consistently, and we got to have good quality at the same time to make that truly effective there. So, and then third thing I like to bring up is the diet and nutrition standpoint, which again can be a touchy subject with some of our our physical therapists not knowing where they stand on this field. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to ask. If we're not asking, we're missing. And if we're missing, we're leaving that person stranded because they're probably not bringing it up with anybody else at this point. And when we know traditionally in the medical setting that a lot of our guidance is lackluster anyway. So even if they did have an opportunity to chat with a primary care physician or something, we don't know that we have the time to actually educate them. But if we can cut out time to have that conversation, we're at least doing the due diligence of asking the right questions. And then from there, we can decide, do this person need extraordinary circumstances of help that we might not be able to offer? But when it comes to diet and nutrition, for me, there's a few things that I want to definitely hone in on. Is that If I'm seeing someone who is training regularly, putting in a good volume of training, they need to be eating to sustain that. We don't need to eat so much that they're sustaining growth of fatty tissues and other things, but we need to be at least sustaining the activity that they're putting in. And if this is an athlete that's looking to see performance gains, then we probably need to be eating to exceed what their training volume is at. So from a calorie standpoint, there often I will see sometimes that people who are coming in with overtraining symptoms are in fact just under fueling their body and under eating, and we need to figure out how we can boost some of those calories in a healthy way to sustain some of the activity level that they're putting themselves at. So well, obviously always are dealing with people in our traditional medical world who are overeating, but in the fitness side sometimes it's the opposite, in that we're under eating. We need to address that. So just having a conversation about rough total volume of food intake, but even better yet, then for tissue recovery and tissue growth and performance enhancements of that aspect, we need to be making sure that protein intake is at an adequate level. So and what that means, you're going to see literature all across the board on exactly what number is to dial in there, but we essentially need to be eating more than most people have probably put time into figuring out how to get into their diet. So a lot of times the suggestion is that a 1-to-1 ratio for our athletes. If they're a 150-pound athlete, they should be shooting close to 150 pounds of or 150 grams of protein per, so 1 gram per pound of body weight there. Um, and I think that can be fluctuated, plus and minus a little bit depending on their goals. And, ideally, you might want to be basing that off like an ideal lean body mass. And that doesn't have to be directly at a 1-to-1 ratio. But if you start asking people what they're getting into their diet, especially some of these, moms and dads and the day-to-day goers of everyday life, they're missing opportunities to be fueling themselves with protein. And you'll find athletes who should be eating 130, 140, 160 grams of protein who might only be consuming 50 or 60 or 70 grams of protein in a day. So they're under eating and under consuming protein by over 50% of what we know can produce adequate effects of recovery of tissues and improving performance as well. So we start with programming. We absolutely hammer out sleep and finding ways to improve sleep, which there's been tons of podcasts and tons of books out there and what we can look at. And but we have to have that conversation. If we're not having that conversation, we're missing that boat. And the same then goes with diet and nutrition. You don't have to be the absolute expert. We don't have to sit down and crank out perfect macros for these people. But you got to have the questions available so that the answers there can dictate which direction we have to go with these people. And often for me, that's looking at calorie intake, is looking at protein intake, and looking at how we can maximize getting people into that right cluster of lifestyle factors to see improvement in their ability to tolerate their training there. So I think we need to prioritize recovery over worrying about overtraining with our novice athletes, because likely if we compare them to people like professional athletes who are training 3 to 5 and maybe 10 times the volume, we can't just say that it's overtraining that's the issue. It's that they're overtraining within the bubble that they have. And if we can improve these lifestyle factors and really hone in on the things that lead to recovery, then I don't necessarily know that we have to worry about training, because I think we need to be promoting continued effort of fitness and activity levels, because we see across the board that hands down, when those start to drop, when our activity levels start to drop and we get people away from the gym or away from what they like to do, then we run risks of bigger health issues from physical to mental factors there. So tough question for sure. Absolutely not saying that you can't be overtraining. We need to be having those conversations when that is the truth. But more often than not, what I'm finding with our day-to-day athletes is that their recovery volume does not meet their training volume. And if we can improve their recovery volume, all of a sudden that opens up a door for withstanding and tolerating the training volume that they're at, or even maybe opening up the door to a little bit more improvement in performance with the training volume that they're looking to reach there. So something to think about, some questions that are worth diving into with your clients and our athletes out there, making sure that we're giving them the best. We have the time to do it, make the time to do it. Let's make these athletes, uh, let's make sure that these athletes are performing the way that they really truly want to be doing, because fitness and lifestyle, we know how important it is to each and every one of us, but it's the same to our athletes and our clients. So let's make sure that they can be doing that at the tip top level they wish to be doing. So If you guys are at Sampler this weekend, I'll be looking forward to seeing you. I'm heading down to Nashville just in a few hours here. If not, catch us on ptonice.com. Check out the podcast. Look for Hump Day Hustling. And if you're looking for a little bit more content, look at the Vice lectures that we offer as well on Tuesday nights. So have a good weekend. We'll talk to you later. We're out.